Now let's meet the Hopkins family and a well-to-do woman. At 35, Elizabeth Fisher Hopkins was the second wife of prosperous and educated Stephen Hopkins. The Hopkins were strangers from London. In fact, Stephen had worked as a somewhat rebellious clerk for the Church of England, reading passages from the bishop's Bible to the congregation, sometimes misquoting it on purpose to make his point. Now he is a tanner and a successful leather merchant. Elizabeth was loving mother to 2-year-old daughter Damaris and loving stepmother to 14-year-old Constance and 12-year-old Giles. Her stepchildren were from Mary Kent, Stephen's first wife, who also gave birth to their sister Libby. However, while Stephen was traveling, Mary died, leaving the underage children behind. And just before they left for the New World, little Abby died. This loving stepmother and mother had a lot of responsibility with 3 children, but guess what? Elizabeth is also pregnant, very heavy with child. If she thought he would be born in the New World, she should have known better, especially because of her husband's experience with travel delays. Stephen Hopkins was the only pilgrim to have been to the New World already. In 1609, he was on the ill-fated Sea Venture, headed to Jamestown, when the ship was hit by a hurricane on the coast of uninhabited Bermuda, where all 150 passengers survived. Surrounded by plenty of tropical food and fowl, in 10 months, they were able to cut down the local cedar and build 2 small ships, Deliverance and Patience, and continue to Jamestown, where many of them died of the plague. However, while still on the island, the castaways began fighting about who was in charge. Hopkins reasoned that the shipmaster had no say over them, as they weren't on the sea, and the Virginia governor, who happened to be on the ship, had no say over them, as they weren't in Virginia. Hopkins argued that as a result, they had a right to stay in lush Bermuda if they wanted to. This act of mutiny led to his death sentence. Fortunately, his silver tongue got him out of it. Stephen is excited to bring his family back to the New World with critical skills on how to get along with the natives. Elizabeth probably wasn't feeling so excited to give birth to their son Oceanus on the Mayflower in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But she was lucky to have a midwife and 2 doctors on board, with Constance and 2 servants to assist her. Maybe it wasn't so easy to have 2 servants, Edward Doty and Edward Leicester, the 2 Edwards. First, they weren't forever servants who always deferred to the boss. They were indentured, meaning they paid for the voyage by what? Working for the family 7 years, but they didn't get along. In fact, before that first Thanksgiving, their animosity culminated in a duel, the first in the New World. Both drew blood, nobody died. As soon as his debt was paid off, Leicester left for Jamestown and was never heard from again. Doty stayed, married Faith Clark, had 9 children, one of whom is my ancestor and the ancestor of President Calvin Coolidge, and died quite rich working for Isaac Allerton. Opportunity only available to Elizabeth's former servant in the New World. Servant or master, in 1620, everyone was fearful of the unseen. Fears of sea monsters, witchcraft, and tree spirits were still very real. From their first days in Cape Cod, Elizabeth and the planters had seen curling smoke from the campfires off in the distance, and even a hunting party of the natives off in the distance. As they built their one-room houses, their fear of the unseen natives had grown. One day, while they were still building Plymouth, a tall, bronze man walked into their tiny village, wearing little more than feathers and a leather string at his waist. Everyone peeked out to see him. Stephen Hopkins, from his experience in Jamestown, approached the native. They were all astonished when the stranger said, "Welcome, English. Do you have beer?" Their fear turned to relief, and they happily shared a drink. They learned his name was Samoset, from a tribe in Maine, where British fishermen had taught him some English. He spent the day explaining the lay of the land and the tribes who traded in the area. He was invited to dinner, which he enjoyed. Then he announced he would spend the night. Guess where? With Elizabeth and Stephen Hopkins' family. Having a naked native spend the night was a new experience. New experiences and all, life was still hard for anyone in the 1600s, even a well to do one, especially in the boonies. Like every colonist, Elizabeth had to help provide for the common good, like cooking and washing for everyone and protecting the children while battling sickness and starvation. In fact, Oceanus and Damaris both died young, but Elizabeth was successful in having five more New World children to increase the strength of the colony. Later, Elizabeth's family issues moved from survival to legal as Stephen opened a small public house to serve alcohol. The planters didn't mind drinking, but they put their collective foot down on drunkenness, especially on Sunday, while playing shuffleboard with servants at inflated prices. Those things they didn't like. Stephen got fined repeatedly. Like her stepchildren's mother, Elizabeth died, leaving underage children at home. But she did get to meet the first 8 of her step grandchildren. Let's see Elizabeth's legacy. In 1627, Constance married Nicholas Snow, who had come on the Anne, their first supply ship with supplies. They had 9 kids. A 500-page book lists their descendants. Giles, the quiet son, moved 35 miles away to Yarmouth on Cape Cod before Elizabeth died. Stephen had sent him there to cut hay and tend his cattle for the winter. Giles eventually became the official town surveyor and married Catherine Weldon and had 10 children. Unfortunately, except for Deborah, Elizabeth's New World children weren't so lucky. Even for Caleb, the chosen one. For some reason, Stephen left him everything in his will. Because of Caleb's affection for his older brother, he gave Giles a large tract of land on the Cape. Then he became a sailor and died in Barbados while still a young bachelor. Damaris II married Jacob Cook, whose father and brother had come on the Mayflower. But Damaris II also died in childbirth with their third child, who also died. However, one of her children became the ancestor to Jane Fonda. Ruth, a sickly child, died young. But poor little Lizzie, who became an orphan at 9, simply disappeared while in the contracted custody of a neighbor. It was not safe for a girl or young woman without a father, brother, or husband. Even an uncle was known to sometimes sell off his orphan nieces, even the daughter of a loving, well to do woman like Elizabeth. Now we've shed a little more light on Elizabeth Fisher Hopkins.